Imagine a world where male beauty became a currency of power, where irresistibly handsome young men were taken from their homes to become secret lovers of the most powerful men in the Ottoman Empire and ancient Rome. While this might sound scandalous, the reality is that this occurred far earlier than you might imagine. These concubines were more than mere companions. They became key figures in imperial courts, navigating pleasure, politics, and secrets that would surprise even the boldest of our subscribers today. If this is your first time on the channel, subscribe now so you don't miss any important content about the darkest chapters of our history. Much has been said about the role of female concubines in the polygamous unions of ancient cultures, but little is mentioned about male concubines, exceptionally beautiful young men who were taken from their families and brought to the courts to please powerful men. The first thing to note is that relationships between men were a legal and accepted practice in the ancient world. Humanity inherited this custom from ancient Greece, where it was common for men between the ages of 20 and 40 to establish relationships with youths aged between 12 and 18. These relationships could be both sexual and emotional, often involving an exchange of knowledge and teachings. One of the most famous cases of this type of relationship was that of Socrates, one of the most important figures in universal philosophy. In his youth, Socrates had a romantic relationship with his teacher Archelaus, which was not unusual for the time. Later in adulthood, Socrates was admired by several of his disciples, though his favorite was Alcibiades, a young man of great beauty and wit who profoundly impacted his life. In 5th century BCE Athens, these relationships were seen as opportunities for the youth's intellectual and emotional growth, in a context where learning and the transmission of knowledge were highly valued. In the patriarchal society of Rome, masculinity was conceived in a very particular way. A Roman citizen was expected to govern himself and others, especially those of lower social classes. Homosexual relationships were tolerated as long as the Roman citizen assumed the active role in the relationship. This dynamic of power implied that the concubine, whether a slave or a freeborn youth, interacted with powerful figures of the empire. These relationships were not limited to sexual satisfaction. They were complex unions that could influence political matters. An example of this was the story of the Greek concubine Antinous and Emperor Hadrian. The ruler expressed great affection for the young man and allowed him to accompany him on important diplomatic negotiations and state discussions. It is believed that the relationship between Hadrian and Antinous was not just a love story but a bond of great mutual trust. The young lover not only brought charm and beauty but also intelligence and insight, participating in matters of governance. In fact, Antinous' death in the Nile River was a severe blow to Hadrian, who, in his grief, deified the young man, built temples in his honor, and even founded a city named after him. In ancient Rome, some men chose to have a concubine before marrying a woman. This relationship was seen as a phase of life, a bond that provided emotional and sexual stability before entering into marriage. The concubine held a special status within the hierarchy of household slaves. In the wedding hymn Carmina, written by Valerius Catullus, the situation of the groom's concubine is described. The young man, anxious about his future, feared abandonment. If cast aside, he would lose his privileges, have his long hair cut, and be forced to abandon his passive role to interact actively with his master's slaves. Male concubinage was also practiced in the Ottoman Empire, which spanned a vast region stretching from modern-day Hungary to Yemen for over 500 years. The Ottomans continued a practice established by the Islamic empires and states that preceded them, viewing sexuality as a broad spectrum and not merely a dichotomy between heterosexuality and homosexuality. The Ottoman harem, an iconic part of the imperial palace, was known for housing female concubines and eunuchs, but it also harbored the sultan's male lovers. These young men were selected for their physical attractiveness and intellect, receiving rigorous training to serve the sultan in various capacities. Some were prepared for warfare, while others were castrated and assigned to domestic activities in the palace. The most attractive were reserved to satisfy the sultan's desires in his private chambers. This practice ensured loyalty and discretion, as the chosen youths had no other option but to fulfill the sultan's wishes and remain within the palace's sphere of influence. One of the most notable episodes occurred during the reign of Sultan Mehmed II, known as the Conqueror. Although Mehmed did not disdain women, it is said that his successor Bayezid II expressed his affection for a palace page. This young man was reportedly the youngest son of Lucas Notaras, a prominent Greek who had been the right hand of the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI. This relationship demonstrated how personal and political interests intertwined in complex ways within the imperial courts. In Ottoman high society, gatherings of scholarly men in elite mansions also fostered homosexual relationships. Sexual life in the Ottoman Empire was diverse, and relationships between men extended beyond the secret chambers of the imperial palace. These relationships were not limited to elite men enjoying the company of lower-ranking beautiful young men. They also formed part of the culture and daily life of the aristocracy. Emmanuel Allery, in his research, highlights that although sexual acts between men could be criticized, as long as a man did not openly express his desire for others, he could act as he pleased without significant repercussions. Sexuality in these contexts has always been a nuanced terrain. It wasn't just about physical pleasure. In a world where power and hierarchy dictated everything, relationships became a form of control and a dance of strategies. Both in Rome and the Ottoman Empire, young lovers not only satisfied desires but also influenced political and social decisions. For example, in Hadrian's case, his love for Antinous led him to make significant decisions that impacted not only his personal life but also the perception of his reign. Although history has often focused on women as concubines and instruments of power, it is essential to remember that men also played crucial roles in the dynamics of the courts. These young men, with their beauty and charm, wielded considerable influence in shaping the political and cultural power structures of the time. They often became confidants of leaders and actively participated in politics, playing roles that went far beyond satisfying personal desires. In conclusion, the history of love and desire is rich and complex, full of details that have been forgotten or silenced for far too long. In both Rome and the Ottoman Empire, sexuality and power intertwined in fascinating ways, and male concubines became key figures within intricate power networks. It is time to open our eyes to these truths and recognize that power was exercised not only through military conquests or political decisions but also through the intimate relationships built within the privacy of royal chambers. If you've made it this far and learned something new from our stories, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Together, we can discover and remember the truths that history often tries to hide.